China now has two of what appear to be the most powerful models ever made, and they're completely open. I was shocked when I read this because I had
So that is Eric Schmidt. He used to work for Google. He worked in various positions at Sun Microsystems, Apple, the Department of Defense, and recently has been talking more and more about AI and how it's going to affect the world. So a few days ago, he was on the Professor G show, Scott Galloway, talking about a few things that are concerning about the growth of AI, specifically about how different nations are advancing in their abilities with AI. So the big news in the open source AI world last week was this: DeepSeek R1 light preview. So this was a AI model out of China. It's an open source model. It's really good, comparable to O1 preview, OpenAI's latest reasoning model. How could it be as good? Well, here's the thing. They managed to crack whatever special sauce OpenAI was using to create the new reasoning models. So OpenAI was, I think, the first company to roll out this idea of test time compute. So before we would train a model, that's where the compute went into training the model, and then we would run inference. The model would basically spit out the answer immediately. Here we're allowing for more resources, for more compute during the inference, during the portion where it's answering the question. So we ask it a question, then we give it a certain amount of, think of it as a thought tokens. I like how they sort of illustrate that here. So average number of thought tokens per problem. So it's similar to how if I asked you a question, I could say, okay, you got to answer it immediately, or, take a minute to think about it, or take an hour to think about it, take a day to think about it. The more I give you, assuming that you put the entire time towards thinking and processing and reasoning about that problem, chances are you'd get better results. Certainly that's true for things like math, for example. If I gave you a math problem, the more time you have to solve it, the more likely it is that you would get the correct answer in general. So I think it is after, 6 weeks, a few months after OpenAI releases their O1 model, that this Chinese company releases something that's eerily similar. So this purple line here, that's the O1 previews, that's OpenAI's model, accuracy somewhere, let's say 44.2, they actually listed right there. And the blue line is the R1 light preview, majority voting, meaning it generates multiple answers. And if one answer seems to be the most common one, that's the one that it chooses to go with. Versus the red line, which is pass at one. So it generates one answer, and that's the answer they go to. That's its final answer. Majority voting for me is like if you're in a new city and you ask 10 different strangers on the street how to get to, town hall, and 9 of them tell you, go north 2 blocks and east 1 block or whatever. And the 10th one goes, go jump off a bridge, right? You're going to think about it and say, no, I think it's the 9 people that told me, go north then east. They're probably right, not that last person. So as you can see here with majority voting, which tends to produce better results, as we increase the number of thoughts per token, the more the model is allowed to think about the answer, the better and better the accuracy gets. In fact, here for one of the problems on the AIME, which is the sort of the mathematical Olympiad, I believe it's the brightest, best math students in the US in high school, I believe is what it is. As you can see here, sort of at maximum, they're getting a 6.7 accuracy on that one versus O1 preview at 44.2. So why is this a problem? Well, there's a couple sort of issues that are wrong with this. Number one of the biggest sort of arguments that we've had against open source AI models, you probably know this as well, what if China gets its hands on it, right? So by open sourcing our models, that allows China to recreate those models and basically steal our competitive advantage. By our, I mean the US, and in partnership with the UK, as Eric Schmidt describes, we would certainly say that the companies that are developing the AI labs between those two countries, of course, Google DeepMind is headquartered in London. I mean, it's safe to say US and the UK are sort of the number one AI developing sort of coalition. And it was kind of assumed that China was, let's say 5 years behind. I believe Eric Schmidt said that they were several years behind, or so he thought. And so open sourcing some of these models would lead to them sort of catching up rapidly. Well, this sort of pours a lot of water on that fire, because not only are they creating these models that are very competitive, they're obviously recreating them very, very soon after, OpenAI releases theirs. I believe I think it was 6 weeks apart. It was some small number of weeks like that between the release of the O1 and the DeepSeek R1. So O1 preview was released September 12th, and DeepSeek R1, so they announced it on November 20th. The point being here is that while we're worried about like, should we open source our models so China doesn't copy them, they meanwhile reverse engineer our models, or maybe it was some sort of a concurrent thing that they were trying to do. Well, that seems unlikely. It's more likely that there was some breakthrough, something that OpenAI published or something they talked about that allowed them to sort of like replicate that. And then once they're able to replicate that, they in fact open source it. So that whole argument kind of goes out the window. Here's Eric Schmidt.
I'll give you an example. This week, there were two libraries from China that were released, open source. One is a problem solver that's very powerful, and another one is a large language model that's equal, and in some cases exceeds the one from Meta, with which they use every day. It's called Llama 3, 400 billion. I was shocked when I read this because I had assumed that in my conversation with the Chinese, that they were 2 to 3 years late. It looks to me like it's within a year now. So it'd be fair to say it's the US and then China within a year's time.
And certainly, if you look at the chatbot arena, where we have the best models sort of duking it out to see which one's the best, rated by people anonymously, sort of blindly, without being able to know which model they're rating, side by side before the other ones. Of course, OpenAI generally tends to hold the number one position. But generally, towards the top, we see Claude, ChatGPT, or some OpenAI model like the O1, and Gemini, more recently Grok, right? Elon Musk's XAI company is producing Grok 2. But not too far behind, we see Yi Lightning. We're also seeing Alibaba with Qwen Max, DeepSeek, etc. Now, if you follow AI safety memes on Twitter, you've probably seen some of the new sort of weapons and various Skynet apparatus that is being released. Some pretty scary stuff that's, automated, that's making decisions in combat or has the potential to with the right AI model behind it. Things that are kind of scary to look at, like, for example, this robot dog that is able to quietly swim up to you like a crocodile and start blasting, basically. We're also seeing sort of AI versus AI, Skynet versus Skynet. So, for example, US military using AI machine guns to counter drones. And there's a number of companies like this that are doing various anti-drone technology, largely driven by, there's neural nets, AI models that are kind of baked in there. So we've had the first sort of recorded killings by an autonomous machine, right? A drone that was not connected to a human operator in any way, shape, or form. There was no off switch, no kill switch. Which that's a weird terminology to use for an autonomous murder drone, right? A kill switch. But the first recorded casualties were in 2020, as far as we know, right? And then since then, they've been rapidly increasing. You might have seen that Claude, Anthropic, is joining the US military. They're going to be working with them more closely, allowing the Claude models to be used for US military purposes. So we do see more and more of an overlap between sort of the US military industrial complex and these AI startups, AI labs. So you can obviously imagine that in China, probably something similar is happening. Certainly, I'm sure the leadership there isn't sleeping on this technology. And so one of the points that Eric Schmidt is making is like, at what point do we start sort of making some treaties or some sort of agreements about how we're going to be using these technologies in warfare? Because certainly you can imagine these things being weaponized very, very easily, right? They're getting speed, agility, dexterity. The models behind them that are able to reason, solve problems, to troubleshoot, they're getting better and better, right? So we're having the sort of the physical embodiment of these robots that's just going through the roof. At the same time, we have this massive race to improve the reasoning models. When we combine them, something potentially kind of scary emerges. I think whatever side of the aisle you're on, whatever you feel about AI, certainly you can see how the combination of these high-tech agile robots and these AI models could be kind of scary. Here are some kamikaze sea drones that can carry up to 500 kilos of TNT. So here you see it, they're trying to shoot it down, it's trying to approach the ship, and there it goes. That's quite a big blast there. That's one thing that's kind of that's scary to me, is just how fast and agile these robots are getting. We haven't quite fully, I think, we're prepared for that. Like the movies and the Hollywood did not prepare us for the fact that they would be swarms of these things and that they would be very fast, because mostly robots are, I think, portrayed in the past as kind of slow moving things. Now we're realizing, no, they're going to be far, far faster and more agile than humans can possibly be. This guy cracks me up. So this is from, if you haven't seen the movie, Don't Look Up. I think an A-star performance. This character, he makes a few minor appearances, but is just absolutely my favorite character in the movie. He is supposed to play a kind of a tech billionaire that built one of these massive tech companies. And throughout the whole movie, I don't think he barely makes eye. He's supposed to be playing somebody that is like highly, highly autistic. Doesn't make eye contact with anybody pretty much at all, except I think once or twice when he's like just tearing them to bits with data and like just erasing their sense of self-worth. Absolutely a phenomenal character. But yeah, everything's fine. Everything's fine. But here's Eric Schmidt talking about sort of having some sort of an international treaties to prevent AI weaponization, and how would we go about doing that?
Talk about this in a historical context of the nuclear weapons regime, which Dr. Kissinger, as you know, invented largely. What's interesting is working with him, you realize how long it took for the full solution to occur. America used the bomb in 1945. Russia or Soviet Union demonstrated it in 1949. So that's roughly was a 4-year gap, and then there was sort of a real arms race. And once that, it took roughly 15 years for an agreement to come for limitations on these things, during which time we were busy making an enormous number of weapons, which ultimately were a mistake, including, these enormous bombs that were unnecessary. And so things got out of hand. In our case, I think what you're saying is very important that we start now. And here's where I would start. I would start with a treaty that says we're not going to allow anyone who's a signatory of this treaty to have automatic weapon systems. And by automatic weapons, I don't mean automated. I mean ones that make the decision on their own. So an agreement that any use of AI of any kind in a conflict sense has to be owned and authorized by a human being who is authorized to make that decision. That would be a simple example. Another thing that you could do as part of that is say that you have a duty to inform when you're testing one of these systems in case it gets out of hand. Now, whether these treaties can be agreed to, I don't know. Remember that it was the horror of nuclear war that got people to the table, and it still took 15 years. I don't want us to go through an analogous bad incident.
Now, at the same time, our ability to create very lifelike people that are very believable but are completely AI generated, is getting better and better. And I'm not just talking about like the visual qualities. Like, for example, this is AI generated by Flux 1.1 Pro Ultra Raw. So a lot of these are indistinguishable from reality, generated by something that you can run on your home computer. And at the same time, our ability to really customize how these avatars behave, how these AIs behave, how charismatic and convincing they are, is getting a lot better. More on that in just a second, but here's Eric Schmidt talking about a demo that he recently saw.
You were talking earlier about the impact on social media. I saw a demonstration in England, in fact. The first command was build a profile of a woman who's 25, she has 2 kids, and she has the following strange beliefs. And the system wrote the code and created a fake persona that existed on that particular social media case. Then the next command was take that person and modify that person into every possible stereotype, every race, sex, so forth and so on, age, demographic thing, with similar views, and populate that. And 10,000 people popped up just like that. So if you wanted, for example, today, this is true today, if you wanted to create a community of 10,000 fake influencers to say, for example, that smoking doesn't cause cancer, which, as we know, is not true, you could do it. And one person with a PC can do this. Imagine when the AIs are far, far more powerful than they are today.
Now, we'll come back to that in just a second, because there was a really kind of mind-blowing study that got released very recently from a person that we're already familiar with, that created that paper, Social Simulacra. But keep one more thing in mind as you kind of think about this, is this idea of AI becoming agentic, of AI agents capable of pursuing long-term plans. Here's what Eric Schmidt is saying about that.
Remember that there's a transition to agents. And the agents do things. So it's a travel agent, or it's, whatever. And the agents speak English. You give them English and they respond in English. So you can concatenate them. You can literally put agent 1 talks to agent 2, talks to agent 3, talks to agent 4, and there's a scheduler that makes them all work together. And so, for example, you could say to these agents, design me the most beautiful building in the world. Go ahead and file all the permits, negotiate the fees of the builders, and tell me how much it's going to cost, and tell my accountant that I need that amount of money. That's the command. So think about that. Think about the agency, the ability to put an integrated solution that today takes 100 people who are very talented, and you can do it by one command. So that acceleration of power could also be misused.
So recently there was this paper, Generative Agent Simulations of 1,000 People. So Jun Sung Park is the person behind Social Simulacra, where they were able to simulate a whole town guided and controlled by basically, I think it was like 25 little chat GPTs running around and controlling everyone's actions. Here they did something similar using these a bunch of 2-hour interviews of people that were sort of created as these generative agents that were able to simulate how those people would behave in certain situations, what their beliefs would be, etc. So these are real human participants simulated by, I assume, some OpenAI model. So the person behind both those incredible papers, Jun Sung Park, did an interview with the A16Z YouTube channel where he kind of shares his vision for where this is going. Take a listen.
I think there are certainly things that we can do because there's now large language models. And that fundamentally different thing for me was this idea of simulating human behavior. And I think there's a lot that we can sort of gain from it in terms of future application spaces. I think I mentioned briefly about this idea of, well, what if we can go beyond believability to create agents that are even accurate? And I think this is sort of application space in general is something that I'm also learning a lot from actually, in fact, this audience. My advisor and my team are big fans of games, but we are not from that community. And one thing that we're seeing is that there's a lot of really interesting potential. Even if they look like toys, sort of a lot of really interesting technical advances, they look like toys at the beginning, right? So I think there's a lot that we can gain from there. I think going forward, sort of the application spaces that I'm sort of interested in is also in things like, can we run simulations so we can learn more about ourselves? For instance, in fact, some of the places that I'm visiting now are more places like banks, like the Bank of England and so forth, where these places, they need to new economic policies, or many of my colleagues in the department who focus more on social science, they need to test out their theories. Now, if you can run simulations with realistic human behavior and find out, at least to some extent, the answers to these really complex social phenomena and challenges, then I think that actually would be a new tool that the community in the past, especially those communities in economics and social science, they didn't have, that will allow us to do interesting stuff.
So I think those were some of the main points that were brought up by Eric Schmidt. So from agents to simulating, 100,000 people on the social networks to maybe convince people to follow a certain course of action, so some misinformation, disinformation, whatever you want to call it, to agentic behavior, to weaponized sort of AI models, so weapons that make decisions about when to kill, how to best accomplish the best kill count. At some point, somebody's going to introduce some sort of a efficiency ratio, like how do we decrease the cost per kill or whatever, and then we allow perhaps some model to figure that out, like how do we kill the most amount of people with the least amount of expense incurred. That's coming at some point. So, and before we kind of get to that place, I think the point that Eric is making, and I think a lot of other people are making, is that we should probably have some sort of these agreements in place of what is not acceptable. Where do we kind of draw the line? Now, he's doing a lot of these interviews, a lot of these rounds, because he recently released, a number of books, actually. So Genesis is the most recent one with Henry Kissinger on it as one of the authors. Before that, it was The Age of AI. It also looks like with Henry Kissinger. I haven't read these, but I've personally been following a lot of the things that he's saying, a lot of the interviews that he's been doing, because keep in mind, this is somebody that's been kind of an insider in the AI space for quite some time. Not just the AI space, but also the DoD, the Department of Defense of the US. So I think it's probably fair to say that he's probably seen some stuff that the rest of us haven't, he's got access to stuff that we haven't seen ourselves. and probably kind of knows where a lot of this stuff is going. Can probably guess better at what the trajectory of AI will be in the future. But let me know what you think about that. Do you agree with some of the things he's saying? How do you feel about China, basically cracking the most advanced models that we have in the market right now and just like releasing them open source? Are you worried about thousands of AI replicants sort of running amok on the social medias? Anyways, let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. With that said, if you made this far, thank you so much for watching. My name is Wes Roth, and I'll see you next time.